I spent my entire life giving, offering love, time, money, and myself, until one evening, at a table laden with food I had prepared, I heard something that shattered me forever. This isn't just a tale of humiliation, it's a story of awakening. If you've ever felt invisible within your own home, this will resonate with you. I still remember the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft jazz music drifting through the house I owned, and the aroma of the roast chicken I'd seasoned that morning, slow cooking while I ran errands. The dinner wasn't even meant for me, but I was there because Olivia had forgotten to mention her parents were visiting again, and the house needed to be perfect. I should have known better than to stay. I should have anticipated what was coming the moment her mother fixed me with a look, half curious, half condescending, and asked, "And you are?" Olivia didn't hesitate. Laughing as if it were the funniest thing she'd ever heard, she said, "Oh, that's Margaret, our unofficial maid, who keeps the house running." Everyone laughed, even my own son. I just stood there, clutching the empty wine bottle I'd brought up from the basement. I smiled politely, though inside I felt the ground vanish beneath me, my heart breaking piece by piece. I excused myself, set the bottle down, and slowly walked to my bedroom. They kept laughing behind me. Not one of them, not even my son, corrected her or said, "That's my mother." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the door I'd painted years ago when we first moved in. I recalled the day I signed those mortgage papers, my name, my credit, my down payment. Ethan had just graduated college. Olivia wasn't even part of the picture yet. They had nothing, and I gave them everything. And now, I was the maid. The next morning, I made coffee like always and fed the cat Olivia pretended to care about. When she finally came downstairs in her yoga clothes, too absorbed in her phone to greet me, I waited silently. Eventually, she looked up, and I handed her the keys. Front door, back door, garage, mailbox. "What's this?" she asked, raising her perfectly shaped brow. I smiled. "Good luck paying the mortgage now." She blinked, confused. "What?" I walked past her, down the hall, past the photos I'd framed, the furniture I'd chosen, the walls I'd painted. I didn't take anything except my purse and the coat I'd worn when I brought Ethan home from the hospital. I didn't say goodbye. I heard Ethan calling my name as I opened the door. I didn't stop. He ran barefoot after me in the driveway, but I kept moving. I didn't slam the car door. I closed it quietly, calmly, because something inside me had snapped, but not in the way you might think. It wasn't anger or sorrow. It was clarity. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Clarity is quiet. It doesn't shout or plead. It simply knows. And for the first time, I knew I was done. I didn't know where I was headed, but I knew exactly where I wasn't staying. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was Ethan standing stunned in the driveway. Neither of us realized what we'd just lost. They say you don't realize you're drowning until you finally take a breath. That first night in the small apartment left to me by my great-aunt Ruth wasn't freedom, at least not yet. It was silence. Thick, echoing silence that settled over everything like dust. The apartment smelled of time, old floorboards, yellowed wallpaper, and a heater groaning with age. I dropped my bag on the kitchen table and stood there, unsure whether to laugh or cry. In the end, I did neither. I stood there, staring down at the chipped tiles, memories of the home I had just left swirling in my mind. But it wasn't a home anymore. Not for me. In the days that followed, I moved like a ghost through the quiet apartment. I slept on the couch since the bed frame upstairs was broken. My meals were simple: peanut butter sandwiches, and microwaved soup. I didn't reach out to anyone. Not because I was alone, but because no one reached out to me. Ethan didn't text or call, not a single word. Maybe Olivia had told him not to. Or perhaps, worse, maybe he just didn't care. I kept replaying that dinner in my head, the way they laughed, especially his laugh. I had raised that boy alone after my ex-husband walked out. I gave up my career, my dreams, my entire self. I cleaned motel rooms at night and stocked grocery shelves at dawn just to keep a roof over our heads. When my parents died and left me insurance money, I used it all to buy that house, our home. I never charged rent, never asked him to pay a penny. Yet somehow, in Olivia's story, I had become nothing more than the help. At night, I began writing in old spiral notebooks, the kind I used to buy for Ethan in middle school. Page after page, not meant for anyone else, just for me. I poured out things I'd never said aloud. How I stood in the kitchen waiting for him to say thank you. How I cried in the garage when they went out to dinner without me. How I pretended to be asleep to avoid hearing them mock the TV shows I loved in the living room I paid for. Then one day, while searching for a light bulb in the upstairs storage closet, I found an old metal trunk Ruth had kept beneath her sewing machine. It was heavy and rusted. Expecting thread and buttons, I pried it open and instead found dozens of envelopes. One in particular changed everything. It was addressed to me in Ruth's familiar handwriting, dated almost 30 years ago. The letter began, "If you're reading this, it means you've come back, and I'm sorry you had to." My heart raced as I carefully unfolded the fragile yellowed pages. Inside were hospital forms, notes, and a single photograph of a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. Not Ethan. The name written below was Michael Jameson. I read the letter 3 times before it all made sense. Ruth had been a nurse at the hospital where Ethan was born. She said she'd always had doubts, noticing something strange in the nursery the night I gave birth. A last-minute room change, a mix-up with the tags. But by the time she raised the concern, it was too late. The babies had already gone home. She never told me, out of fear and hope, that she was wrong. Years later, she found a document buried in her files, a quiet settlement between the hospital and another family. That's when she knew Ethan wasn't my son. My hands shook as I stared at the photo and the name Michael Jameson. My mind refused to accept it. If this was true, then who was Ethan? What was I to him? But instead of grief or anger, I felt something else. Freedom. Not because I didn't love Ethan, but because suddenly all those years of pain, of feeling like a stranger in my own life, finally made sense. Maybe that coldness I always sensed from him wasn't imagined. Maybe he'd always felt like a stranger too. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't losing my mind after all. I spent the rest of the night going through every paper in that trunk. Ruth had kept everything: DNA reports, affidavits, even a small article about the Jameson family. Successful, educated, local, still living just a few miles away. My real son had been close by all along, growing up just down the road. Carefully, I folded the letters and placed them in a fresh envelope, then slid it into my nightstand drawer. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, searching the face that looked back at me. I didn't recognize that woman anymore. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel ashamed of the woman I saw in the mirror. She was broken, yes, but she was beginning to awaken, and the world hadn't yet grasped what that meant. There's a type of silence that isn't peaceful. It feels punishing. That was the silence I lived in for weeks after reading Aunt Ruth's letter. I didn't know how to handle the truth I carried. It was like a live wire inside me, dangerous to touch and impossible to ignore. I didn't reach out to Ethan or seek out Michael. I simply existed. Every day, I woke, made 1 cup of coffee, stared out the dusty kitchen window, and tried to figure out who I was now. The Margaret who raised Ethan wasn't the same woman who read those letters. That Margaret had been a mother, a wife once, a caregiver, someone who gave everything. But without that identity, who was I? One evening, when the heater failed in the apartment, I lit a candle, wrapped myself in blankets, and curled up on the couch with the hospital files spread across my lap. I must have read through them 100 times. Every line, every signature, every timestamp. It all checked out. It was real. Michael Jameson, my biological son, had been born the same night as Ethan, in the same wing of the hospital, which later quietly settled with another family, hoping the truth would never come to light. Ruth had made copies of everything before she passed, leaving me the fragments of a truth stolen from me. I felt grief, not for Ethan, but for the time lost with Michael. The birthdays, the first days of school, scraped knees, science projects. All the moments I'd thought I was sharing with my child were meant for someone else. Still, I didn't hate Ethan. My love for him wasn't biological. It had been unconditional, or so I believed. But when the person you raised neither defends nor even truly sees you, it forces a painful reevaluation of everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I finally gathered myself. I had been hiding too long. I wasn't ready to face Ethan yet, but I could start somewhere quiet. I walked into town and stood across the street from the small bookstore near Main and Elm, Jameson's Books. It was painted deep green with hand-lettered signs on the windows. I'd passed it many times without noticing it before. He was there. Michael. I didn't need to ask. He looked about 30, maybe a little older, clean-cut, wearing reading glasses. He was helping a young woman find a poetry book. His voice was soft and patient, his posture gentle but confident. I stood across the street, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the son I never knew I had, and tears quietly streamed down my cheeks and into the collar of my coat. I didn't go in, not that day. I just watched. And then I did it again the next day, and the next. It became a ritual. I'd walk the block, sit on the bench near the corner, pretending to check my phone or sip coffee from a paper cup, all the while watching Michael live the life I'd never been part of. It wasn't stalking, it was mourning, and also preparation. Slowly, I began to piece things together. Sitting outside that bookstore, I noticed small details: the delivery schedule, the names of customers, the rhythm of the shop. I was observing, yes, but not only him. I was tracking them, too. Ethan and Olivia, subtly, from a distance. I had memorized their habits. Olivia was always active on social media, tagging her favorite brunch spots, yoga classes, and wine-tasting events. Following their trail wasn't difficult. What I discovered made my stomach turn. They weren't struggling. They were putting on a show. Olivia's business, some lifestyle coaching brand, was mostly a facade. Rented office space, fake followers, maxed out credit cards to keep up appearances. And Ethan had quit his job 6 months ago. Olivia called it manifesting a new chapter. I called it denial. They were building a fragile house of cards, completely unaware that a storm was approaching. I didn't tell anyone what I'd uncovered, at least not yet. Instead, I began keeping a second journal. Unlike the first, which was full of feelings and heartbreak, this one was tactical. Dates, names, business records, public documents. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was making plans. They thought I was gone, invisible, irrelevant. But I was more present than ever, ready to remind them exactly who I was. The first time I saw Michael up close, I couldn't find my voice. It was a rainy Thursday, and the bookstore was nearly empty. He was restocking the biography section, quietly humming. I had been lingering outside for too long, and when he turned and looked through the front window, our eyes met. He gave a polite, friendly smile, just the kind of kindness you offer a stranger. And that's what I was to him, a stranger. My chest tightened. I quickly looked away, pretending to check my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hide it. I hurried around the corner and barely made it to my car before the tears came. How do you tell someone their entire life began with a mistake? How do you look a grown man in the eye and say, "You're not who you think you are, and neither am I"? That night, I pulled out Ruth's letter again and read it 3 more times. She hadn't just uncovered the truth. She had investigated it. Michael Jameson wasn't a guess. It was confirmed. She'd found the settlement papers. The hospital never told me because I wasn't meant to know. The Jamesons must have known something. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to accept a quiet payout. But I wasn't seeking revenge against them. I wasn't even sure what I was seeking. I just wanted to meet him, to see if the ache in my chest could be eased by the reality of who he was. So, I went back. I started small. I bought a book. Michael rang it up himself. "Good choice," he said with a smile. "Hard to find these days." His voice was warm and familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. He handed me the bag, his fingers brushing mine for a moment. I nodded. "You own this place?" I asked. "Sort of," he replied. "My parents helped me get started. They're retired now, so I keep busy here." Of course they helped. Of course he had support. Not like Ethan, who had nothing but my blood, sweat, and sacrifice, only to turn around and treat me like a joke. Michael had parents, but I didn't. Ethan had me, but never wanted what I gave. The universe had scrambled the pieces and left us bleeding over the wrong ones. I began visiting the bookstore every few days, casually. Sometimes I bought a novel, sometimes I just browsed. Michael started to recognize me. He'd say, "Back again," with that easy smile. We made small talk. Weather, books, local events. I never told him my name, not yet. It wasn't time. Meanwhile, back in the shadows of my old life, things were shifting. Ethan sent me a single message, a text that said, "Mom, are you okay?" Nothing else. After 3 weeks of silence, that was all I received. I didn't reply. I had nothing left to say. But I began digging deeper into their world. I pulled up the deed to the house. It was still in my name. Olivia had tried to refinance without my permission, but was denied. She couldn't afford the mortgage. Ethan had no income. I could have evicted them immediately, but that would have been too simple. No, I wanted them to feel the slow unraveling, the creeping fear, the realization that the foundation they stood on wasn't just fragile. It belonged to someone else entirely, me. Every night, I wrote. My new journal was precise. Every receipt, every conversation, every time Michael mentioned a hobby, a favorite author, or a childhood memory, I noted it down, not to use against him, but to understand the son I never got to raise. Between the lines, the truth became clearer than ever before. Ethan didn't treat me poorly because he was switched at birth. He treated me poorly because he chose to, because Olivia allowed it. Somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as someone worthy of respect and started seeing me as someone to dismiss. But Michael didn't know me at all. Yet, in just 5 minutes, he showed me more kindness than Ethan had in 5 years. I wasn't ready to tell him everything, not yet, but I was getting closer. When the moment came, I wouldn't just reveal who I was. I would share the whole story, the hospital, the switch, and the life that was stolen from both of us. First, though, I needed to witness the unraveling of the life I had already left behind. Because once the last piece fell, I wasn't looking back. I never intended to fade into the background of my own story. But sometimes, stepping out of the spotlight is the only way to truly see people for who they are. After that day in the bookstore, something inside me shifted. Not suddenly, but slowly, like the sunrise spreading over a frozen field. Quiet and inevitable. I didn't rush anything. I wasn't just trying to reconnect with a son I'd never known. I was reclaiming myself. I began walking with a little more confidence, speaking with more strength. I bought a used laptop and started organizing my notes into files, evidence, timelines, names. This wasn't a diary anymore. It was strategy, survival. One thing became painfully clear. Ethan and Olivia's world was held together by duct tape and lies. The house they lived in, my house, was still under my name. Olivia's lifestyle brand, Olivia Ascends, was a fabricated empire. Fake clients, fake reviews. She had built her business on buzzwords and filters, peddling personal growth advice while driving a leased luxury car she couldn't afford. I found the LLC documents online, checked tax records, and read through business reviews. Every post was carefully crafted. Every event was a photo op. Behind it all was a mountain of debt, maxed out credit cards, a defaulted private loan, Ethan's unpaid student debt. They were drowning in bills, but too proud, or maybe too arrogant, to admit it. That's when I knew that if I pulled one string, everything would collapse. But I didn't, at least not yet. I had one more step first. Michael. I kept visiting the bookstore, and he still didn't know who I was. But each conversation chipped away at my fear. We talked about books, life, small things, TV shows, good coffee, city noises. One day, we sat at the little cafe next door, and he told me how he'd almost become a teacher, but his passion for books led him into business instead. "You remind me of someone," he said one time, sipping his tea. "Someone I can't quite place." I smiled. "Maybe a librarian." He laughed. "Maybe." That moment stayed with me for days. I didn't just like him, I recognized him. Not just from the file I'd read or the photo Ruth had given me, but in the way he treated others, the way he listened, the quiet strength he carried. It felt familiar, like something of mine. It was in his posture, his calm, his presence. I began dreaming of a different life, one where I raised him, baking cookies together, going to soccer games, cheering from the sidelines. I could picture it so clearly it made my chest ache, but I couldn't go back. So I prepared for what came next. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, not for revenge, but for justice. I wanted the house sold. I had every legal right to it. I'd made the down payment, paid every bill, and never signed it over. Ethan had always told me, "We'll put it in your name later." No hurry. Of course, there was never any rush for him. I was the one footing every bill. Now, I wanted my name back, my rights, my home. If not physically, then at least legally. I met with a lawyer downtown, a woman around my age, sharp and straightforward, who listened without judgment. When I explained everything, she nodded slowly and said, "We'll file the motion this week." I signed the papers steadily. That evening, I walked by the house. The porch light was on. Olivia sat on the swing, scrolling on her phone with a glass of wine in hand. Inside, Ethan was on the couch, playing video games. Their lives were on autopilot, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was already shifting. It wasn't about punishment. It was about restoring balance. When the house sold, they would finally understand the feeling I'd endured for years: powerlessness. And maybe, just maybe, they'd grasp what it meant to be discarded. I didn't slam doors or yell. I simply watched, waited, and walked away. The first domino had fallen, and none of them realized it yet. I've always believed that silence holds more power than noise, that true strength lies not in how loudly you fight, but in how deeply you know you're right. The day the official notice was sent to Ethan and Olivia, I sat at a cafe near the courthouse, calmly stirring honey into my tea, a calm I hadn't felt in years. My lawyer said they'd receive it by morning. Then my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then I turned it over and let the silence speak for me. It wasn't that I didn't want to hear him. I just wasn't ready to listen to his lies. Later that afternoon, I checked my email and saw his message. Short and simple. "Mom, what are you doing? Please call me. Olivia is freaking out." Of course she was. The mortgage was due, and now they couldn't refinance because the person they thought was too weak to matter held the deed, and they never saw it coming. A week later, I got another call. Olivia, this time. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice tight and barely controlled. "Margaret, we really need to talk. This is all just a misunderstanding. Ethan says you're going through something, and we're here to support you, but you're putting our lives at risk, and that's not fair." I listened twice. She called the house hers, but my silence grew sharper, more deliberate. They didn't understand yet, but they would. 2 days later, Ethan appeared at my apartment. I saw him through the peephole before he even knocked. Hair messy, dark circles under his eyes. A man falling apart. I didn't open the door. He stood there for a long time, knocked once, then again, and said, "Mom, please don't do this." I stood on the other side, hand on the knob, but I didn't turn it. I let him sit in the discomfort of being ignored, the same way I had for years. The following week, my lawyer finalized the paperwork to list the house for sale. I would receive every penny, legally, ethically, and emotionally. It was all mine. Olivia tried to fight it, claiming she'd contributed value. My lawyer smiled and said, "Let's see her prove that in court." She couldn't, because she'd never invested in anything but appearances, and those were now falling apart, one filter at a time. Word spread. Olivia's parents stopped commenting on her social media posts. Clients started pulling out. She posted a video trying to justify the unfairness of generational property laws. But people saw through it, and I didn't post a single thing. I just kept showing up at Michael's bookstore. We shared coffee again and talked about an old novel we both cherished. He suggested a memoir to me. "It's about grief," he said, "but also about forgiveness." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I think you'd like it," he added. "Maybe I would, but not yet." I wasn't finished grieving or forgiving. At home, I started packing up old photos. Pictures of Ethan as a baby, school portraits, birthday parties where I did all the work but received no credit. I didn't throw them away. I just put them aside because the woman who had spent her life giving everything was gone. And the woman who replaced her wasn't angry. She was awake. The papers were signed. The house was going on the market. Somewhere inside that green bookstore across town, my real son laughed at something a customer said. completely unaware that his life was about to change too, but for the better, because not every loss is a tragedy. Some are disguised beginnings. I always thought masks were only for costume parties, but Olivia wore hers like a second skin. Perfect, smiling, unshakable. The kind of woman who always knew how to pose for a photo, how to modulate her voice just right in public. But masks eventually crack, and I was about to shatter hers completely. The idea came to me one morning while I was browsing the local business directory. I had already gathered plenty of personal dirt: credit issues, fake Instagram deals, late mortgage payments. But I wanted more than rumors. I wanted facts, something solid, something they couldn't spin. So I hired a local business consultant named Darren. Quiet, professional, discreet. I told him I needed a thorough audit of a company. Nothing illegal, just a deep, private investigation into its structure. I gave him Olivia's company name, Olivia Ascends, LLC. He got to work. A week later, he handed me a neat folder with his findings. What he uncovered caught even me off guard. Olivia's entire business model was a sham. No tax filings for the past 2 quarters. Several invoices forged to look like they came from real clients, but the clients didn't exist. Photo shoots staged at rented properties she claimed were home makeovers. Her so-called partnerships were just affiliate links with exaggerated numbers. She wasn't merely pretending to be successful. She was deceiving everyone. I asked Darren, would this hold up under scrutiny? He looked at me and said, if this goes public, she's finished financially and professionally. That's when I made up my mind. I printed everything out. Then I found the address of Olivia's parents, the same people who once laughed in my home, clinking wine glasses while their daughter humiliated me in my own kitchen. I mailed them the file anonymously. No letter, no signature, just a simple note on top. Everything you think you know is a performance. 2 days later, the first cracks showed. Olivia's Instagram went silent. No stories, no staged morning routines. Her latest post, a motivational quote about feeling misunderstood, was quickly overwhelmed by odd comments. Then, like a row of falling dominoes, her world began to unravel. Her website suddenly went offline for maintenance. Her final scheduled workshop was canceled due to unexpected reasons. Then, I heard the final piece of news from an old neighbor who still kept tabs on her. Olivia's mother was spotted storming out of their home, yelling on the phone, face flushed with anger, her purse swinging wildly. Whatever unfolded behind those closed doors wasn't polished or hidden. It was raw and unfiltered. That night, Ethan called me again. I didn't pick up. He left another voicemail. Mom, I don't know what's going on. Olivia's parents won't talk to us. Someone sent them documents. They think we forged them. Did you? Did you do this? I didn't respond. He was finally seeing her for who she truly was, and himself as well. After all those years defending a woman who tore apart everything around her, starting with me. Let him feel it. Let him sit with that reality. Later that evening, I walked to the bookstore again. Michael was just closing up. He waved when he saw me. Back again, he said, unlocking the door for me. You should just work here at this point. I smiled. Maybe I should. We sat on the floor, surrounded by piles of paperbacks. He was organizing a fresh shipment. I started helping without being asked. Why do you keep coming here? He asked, kindly but curious. His question caught me off guard. I looked at him. Really? I said. He had my eyes. I hadn't noticed that before. I like how it feels here, I said. Like nothing's pretending to be something it's not. He tilted his head thoughtfully. Considering me, Me too. From that point, we worked in silence. No small talk, no questions. But in that quiet space, something settled between us. Not truth, not yet, but something close, a thread tying us together. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's life. I felt seen. The woman who once stood invisible in her own kitchen was gone. In her place stood someone no one expected, someone they never should have underestimated. I used to believe heartbreak hit all at once, like a car crash or a slamming door. But it's not like that. Not always. Sometimes heartbreak creeps in slowly, like water dripping through a roof, drop by drop, until one day, the entire ceiling gives way. By then, Ethan was finally caught in the flood. The news had reached him. The house was officially on the market. Olivia's carefully crafted mask had fallen apart, her business exposed, her reputation unraveling. With no one else to blame, Ethan did what he always did. He came running to me. I heard the knock before I saw him. It was a quiet afternoon, and I was finishing a cup of tea when the sound echoed through the apartment. 3 soft knocks, tentative, as if the person wasn't sure whether they'd be welcomed or shut out. I opened the door slowly. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, unshaven and thinner than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, as if he'd pulled it off the floor. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer, just stepped aside. He walked in and stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, unsure what to do with himself. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "To us?" I nearly laughed. "Us?" I said, as if there'd been an us in years. I sat down calmly in the armchair across from him. "I'm not doing anything to you, Ethan. I'm doing this for me." His jaw tightened. "You're selling the house, my house. I grew up there, and you gave it away," he said quietly. "You let your wife turn me into your maid. You watched it happen. You laughed. You never even apologized." He didn't deny it, just stared at the floor. "I thought you were just being dramatic," he muttered. "I didn't realize it hurt you that much." I stared back. "That's the problem, Ethan. You never bothered to find out what hurt me. You just assumed I'd always be there, cleaning up after you, paying your bills, nodding along while you let that woman chip away at who I was." He flinched. "Olivia's not who I thought she was. That's not news to me." He finally met my eyes, which were now glassy. "I lost everything." I didn't blink. "Number you gave it away." Silence stretched between us. "I miss you," he whispered. I straightened. "I raised you," I said. "Fed you, clothed you, sacrificed for you, and you let me be humiliated in the house I bought." His lip trembled. "I thought she was helping me. I thought we were building something." "You built a lie," I said. "And now it's all falling apart." He stood up, pacing the room restlessly. So, that was it. I just walked away. Then I got up and went over to the kitchen drawer, pulling out the envelope Ruth had left for me. Holding it in my hands, I said, "I need to tell you something now. Please listen. Really listen." He nodded, clearly confused. I handed him the envelope. "These are your birth records. Read them." He sat down and slowly opened it, his brow furrowed before falling as he read the letter, hospital documents, and the DNA tests Ruth had quietly arranged all those years ago. Looking up at me with wide eyes, he said, This can't be real." "It is," I replied. "Are you saying I'm not your son?" "I'm saying you weren't born to me, but I raised you like you were. I gave you every part of myself, even when you didn't want it. He turned pale. So who's your real son? I didn't answer. He just sat there, stunned, mouth slightly open, the pages trembling in his hands. I don't know who I am anymore, he whispered. Now you know how I felt, I said. For years, he didn't really cry, but something inside him shattered. I witnessed it, not with anger or satisfaction, but with a strange calm, because I had finally spoken the truth that needed to be spoken. I walked him to the door. He looked back, eyes full of hope. Can we fix this? I met his gaze. I don't know, I said, but it's not my job to try anymore. Then I gently closed the door behind him, not out of bitterness, but with a sense of finality. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one keeping it open. It took me 3 days to decide how to approach the conversation. I rehearsed in front of the mirror, in my car, even while standing in line at the grocery store, clutching a basket of oranges and whispering the words I struggled to finish. I'm your mother. There was a mistake. You've lived a life that wasn't meant for you. And so have I. Nothing felt right, though. How do you drop a truth like that into someone's life and expect them to survive it? Still, I had to try. Michael was in the bookstore as usual. The sunlight streamed through the windows in golden beams, softening the shelves and casting shadows across the hardwood floor. It felt like a sacred place, a spot where truth could belong. When he looked up and smiled, I almost turned to leave, but I stayed. Hey, he said, you came at the right time. We just got a new shipment of rare poetry editions. I swallowed hard. Actually, I said, I came to talk. He studied me for a moment, sensing something in my voice. Sure, he said softly. Come on back. He led me through a side door to a small break room with a kettle on the counter, a mismatched couch, and a chipped table. Real life, no pretense. We sat down. I've been coming here for a reason, I began, twisting my hands nervously. I figured, he said quietly. You have? You're not really here for the books, then? I let out a quiet, sad laugh. No, I'm not. Then I pulled out the envelope, Ruth's letter, the birth records, the DNA results, and placed it on the table between us. What's this? He asked cautiously. Something that's going to change everything. He looked at me, waiting. About 30 years ago, I began, my voice breaking. There was a mix-up at the hospital. 2 babies were switched at birth. His eyebrows knitted together, confusion spreading across his face. My son, I continued, was given to another family, and their son was given to me. He went very still, saying nothing for a long moment. I raised him, I added, and loved him with everything I had, but he never truly loved me back. His eyes searched mine, slowly piecing together what I hadn't spoken aloud. You think I know you are, I interrupted. He glanced down at the envelope, then picked it up with trembling hands. Inside were the documents, the timeline, the explanation, and Ruth's quiet confession. He read silently. Each second seemed to stretch into eternity. When he finished, he didn't look at me right away. Instead, he set the papers down, his fingers lingering on the edges, as if to hold on to something. This is a lot, he finally said. I know. And you're Margaret? Yes. He looked up, his eyes glassy. I don't feel anything. Not yet. You don't have to, I said gently. I'm not here to ask for a place in your life. I just needed you to know. He nodded slowly. Why now? Because I couldn't live with the silence anymore. The truth deserved to breathe. He leaned back and exhaled deeply. I have parents. They raised me well. I know, I said. I love them. I would never ask you to stop loving them. We sat there in that small room, surrounded by books and the scent of old paper and peppermint tea, and for the first time in years, I felt something: relief. Not joy, not closure, but the freedom of no longer carrying something so heavy alone. After a while, he stood and paced slowly. "I don't know what to do with this," he admitted honestly. "Neither do I, but I don't hate you." Tears welled up in my eyes. "That's more than I expected." He turned to face me again. "You didn't have to come, but you did." "I didn't know how not to," I said. He nodded again, a quiet understanding settling between us. "Can we take it slow?" he asked. "I don't want to make this into something it's not." "I wouldn't ask for anything else." He offered me a faint, fragile smile. "Want to stay for tea?" I smiled back. "I'd love to." That afternoon, we didn't talk about the files again. Instead, we spoke about books, the weather, how he hated the sound of wind chimes but loved the rain. Though the past still lingered between us, raw and untouched, we had started something. Not quite a relationship yet, but maybe, just maybe, a beginning. By the time autumn arrived, the changing leaves weren't the only things shifting. The house sold quicker than I'd expected. I got the full asking price, more than I ever imagined. Ethan and Olivia had to leave within 30 days. No extensions, no negotiations. I wasn't evicting them out of anger. I did it out of necessity, because that house had been my prison for too long. Watching them pack their carefully curated life, box by box, knowing every pillow, plant, and designer trinket had been purchased on borrowed time. It felt like watching a theater set slowly being torn down. The play had ended, the illusion shattered, and the moving truck had arrived. I drove by without stopping, watching from a distance as Olivia barked orders at the movers, her sunglasses hiding whatever pride she had left. Ethan paced the lawn with his phone pressed to his ear. I wondered if he ever imagined this day would come, and if he realized I was the one who made it happen. Their downfall wasn't dramatic. No shouting matches or scandals on the evening news. But it was complete. Olivia's parents withdrew their financial support. Her business lost every major sponsor. The once flawless reputation of her brand became the subject of hushed whispers around town. The woman who once laughed at me in my own kitchen could no longer afford her overpriced skincare products or daily matcha. Ethan tried to find work, any work, but with no degree, no references, and no recent experience, opportunities remained closed. He moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. I heard this from the lawyer. I didn't ask for details, nor did I celebrate, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth and facing consequences. Meanwhile, my life quietly began to change. Michael and I kept meeting, always casually. Coffee, book talks, sharing articles, and little conversations about life. Once he asked about my writing, and I told him I'd started working on a memoir, a story I needed to tell even if it never got published. He said, "You should." Stories like that matter. He still didn't call me Mom, and I didn't expect him to. That wasn't the point. What we were building wasn't out of obligation, but choice, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, we wandered through the farmer's market together. He picked up a jar of apple butter and laughed. "My mom used to make this every fall," he said. The way he said, "my mom," didn't hurt. It felt natural, right? Because he had a mom, and I had a son who didn't see me until it was too late. Some nights, sitting alone with my tea, I wondered if Ethan was sleeping on a mattress or just the floor, if Olivia still wore her silk robes, if they looked at each other now and saw all the things they once ignored. I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of what we were supposed to be. But grief like that is like a shadow. It fades little by little, and pride grows, especially when you learn to love yourself more than you ever loved their approval. I walked through my old neighborhood one last time before the sale closed. Not to haunt it, but to say goodbye. I passed the school Ethan attended, the park where I pushed him on swings, the grocery store where I clipped coupons to afford his favorite cereal. And I let it all go, because I had given everything I had to a family that never gave back. Now I was giving to someone who might never call me mom, but still looked at me with kindness, curiosity, and respect. Sometimes you don't need redemption. You just need peace. And I was finally starting to feel it. It was early November when I got a text from Ethan. Just one line. "Can we meet?" Just once. I stared at it for a long time. Weeks had passed since I last saw him, weeks of silence and distance heavier than any argument we could have had. But something about the message's tone. It wasn't angry, desperate, or blaming. It sounded like surrender. We met at a small park on the edge of town, the kind with rusty benches and a path circling a dried-up pond. I chose the spot because it felt neutral. No memories, no ghosts. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with his hands clasped between his knees. When he looked up for a moment, he reminded me of the boy he once was, awkward, uncertain, waiting for guidance. I sat down beside him, careful to keep some distance. He cleared his throat. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. I nodded, but stayed silent. I wanted to understand. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope, the one with Ruth's letter, the documents, the DNA results. I handed it to him without saying a word. He didn't open it, just held it in his lap as if he'd already read it 1,000 times. "I did a test of my own," he said. "After you told me. Same result." I nodded again. "I spent weeks trying to figure out what to do with it," he went on. "And I kept thinking, if I wasn't your son, then what was I?" I looked at him, really looked, and spoke softly. "You were my child, but I treated you well, like I know how you treated me." He winced. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quickly. "I don't deserve it." "You don't," I said plainly. "But that doesn't mean I hate you." He turned toward me, his eyes moist. "Then what does it mean?" "It means I finally love myself more than I love the idea of you." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. He bowed his head. "I thought I was protecting Olivia by standing by her, but I was just hiding behind her, wasn't I? You let her rewrite the story, and you handed her the pen." He nodded slowly. "I wish I could undo it. You can't." We sat like that for a while, two people unraveling a life built on lies in the cold November air. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I hope he's good to you." I looked at him, surprised. "Michael," he clarified. "Your son." A breath caught in my throat. "He's kind," I said gently. He smiled faintly. "Guess some of that came from you then." We both laughed, tired, soft, not joyful, but not bitter either. "I don't want to be in your life if it hurts you," he said finally. "But if there's ever room for me, just a small corner." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I stood and gazed out at the pond. Leaves drifted like ashes across the surface. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded. "That's more than I hoped for." As I turned to leave, I placed my hand on his shoulder for a brief moment. That was it. The final moment. Not closure, but understanding. And I realized that was enough because I didn't need to fix him anymore. I didn't need to be fixed either. I just needed to be free. And I was. Truly, I was. I'd always thought the word freedom sounded too big, too grand. Something for speeches and parades, not something someone like me could live. But that morning, when I turned the key on the front door of Michael's bookstore, I finally understood what freedom meant. He'd called me the night before, said he had something to show me. His voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper. When I walked in, I saw him standing by the back wall, where a new wooden sign hung above an arched doorway. The sign read, "The Next Chapter." I smiled. "What's this?" He handed me a small brass key, simple, polished. "It's a new section I'm opening," he said. "Cozy reading space, coffee corner, community talks. I wanted it to feel like more than just a store. I wanted it to feel like belonging." I turned the key over in my hand. "And you want me to open it?" He looked at me, serious now. "I want you to have it." I stared at him, and he continued softly. "You gave someone your whole life. They treated you like furniture, like background. But I see you. I don't need you to prove anything to me. You've done enough." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. "You don't have to do this," I whispered. "I know," he said. "But I want to." I walked to the door beneath the sign and slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. Inside, warm light streamed through tall windows. Shelves lined the walls, already half filled with classics and memoirs. A rug lay in the center, with a worn armchair and a small table holding a tea set. It felt like stepping into a room from a forgotten dream. I turned around, overwhelmed. "Michael," he smiled, "consider it yours for as long as you want." I moved to the middle of the room and stood still, breathing it all in. The scent of fresh wood, paper, and possibility. That night, sitting alone in my apartment one last time, the old notebook on my lap with the final page still blank, I wrote, "I was a woman who gave until I disappeared. Then I became the woman who took it all back. Not with anger, not with fire, but with silence, with truth, and with a strength they never expected." The next day, I completed the donation. A portion of the house sale went directly to a foundation supporting women starting over. Those dismissed, discarded, underestimated, just like I had been. They called to thank me, but I didn't need thanks. Every time I stepped into that bookstore, into that next chapter, I remembered who I was now. Not Ethan's mother, not Olivia's servant, but Margaret Walker, woman, survivor, author of her own story. I never needed permission to begin again, just a key. And now that key was in my hand. This time, it didn't open someone else's door. It opened mine.